Downtime activities. Hey everyone, Mitz here again. Today we are going to talk about many different things that you can do in downtime with your players. Trust me when I can tell you that your players do want to do more things in your world than just follow your story and fight your monsters. Most players really enjoy three things in Dungeons & Dragons. That's role-playing, micromanaging their character's inventory and abilities, and combat. But since today we're not going to be specifically talking about combat, although there is some sort of combat-esque ideas running around in downtime, we're mostly going to be talking about the other two. So let's talk about how to manage it and how to make it fun. First, we need to figure a few things out. What do your players actually want to do in your world other than fight monsters? This does seem kind of overstated, but you do want more to do in your world than just fight your bad guys. Where do your players call home in the world? Are they friendly with the locals? Do you, as a dungeon master, have time to flesh out the rest of your world that your players aren't actually exploring? And if you haven't yet, well, this is a good place to start. Towns are filled with people, you see. Those people aren't out all hunting down bad guys and monsters. There are hunters, but there's also blacksmiths, tavern keeps, cobblers, tanners, grocers, loads of different things, loads of different stores that your players can visit. But these people in this town, well, when they're off work, they need somewhere to wind down too. Think about the kind of downtime activities the NPCs in your world might be involved in, as well as the ones that your players might like to try. So, the simple step for this is ask your players. I've kind of made a list here a little bit, so let me just ramble off a few things. Does your town have a theater, an arena, or some other venue for viewing some kind of event? Do the players want to participate in this arena or play or some kind of event? Would your players like their characters to be a little bit more intimate and close with some of the township? Perhaps they really want to get to know the general store manager, even if it is for the purposes of trying to get more discounts. Do your players' characters just go into bars and get drunk on their downtime and start bar fights? Are they into mini games and gambling? Or do they just simply want to go shopping? Or are they planning a heist or a rescue? This is part of an adventure, I suppose, but it is done in downtime. They're not actively worried about combat, they're in a town and they're planning their next steps. Are they doing research for the quest ahead of time? Do they need to talk to specific people in the town? Maybe they'd like to find a quick and easy job between jobs. Many of these activities that I've just mentioned can be found in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. They do have a very simple suggestion and ways to use these specific skills and things for events in downtime. There's another large thing that players often like to do in downtime, that is crafting. I'm going to once again default to referencing Xanathar's Guide here for a simple crafting system, but if you'd like something a little bit more complicated, you are going to have to try and find something third party or homebrew something of your own. The system in Xanathar's shows what proficiency you'll use, what skill, what toolkit, and around about how much gold and how long it will take to create. And if you want it to be magical, there are extra steps in there for that as well. Homebrewing your own rules can be quite handy, especially if you only need specific rules for one or two players. It's much easier to implement crafting rules for players that are interested in them so that you know exactly what they want to craft rather than having to think of a bunch of different systems for a bunch of different items. There are two categories to crafting: player characters crafting and them ordering NPCs to craft for them. NPCs crafting things for players is much easier to handle as a dungeon master, as you don't have to make any rolls. You can simply make it take a certain amount of time and gold. The players can always help out with this by providing extra materials for the worker that is crafting the item for them. Perhaps that is a whole quest that the players could simply ask an NPC, I want this item, how do I craft it? The NPC says, well, it'll take me this much time and this much gold because I have to get these resources. The players might say, hey, we can go and get those resources for you. Well, that means it'll cost us less gold or less time, and you can likely think of something and work it out there. However, I would strongly urge you to lean into letting the players craft things, because this will really push them forward into searching for the items that they need and also actively spending their downtime on something that increases their character's ability, rather than them just sitting around and getting drunk all the time. So a simple way to do this is obviously with some dice rolls. Now remember, it's not fun to fail a lot, so set the DCs low for simple crafted items and slowly increase it the higher it goes. I would err on the side of, if they do roll low on a skill check that is an important one for crafting an item, simply make it cost more resources than expected or take more time. You can introduce a sort of floor system where if they do fail, they do create a flaw in the item, and therefore it might break after a certain amount of uses if they don't notice the imperfection and try and recraft it. But this is a fun way for players to craft things quickly and easily if you're willing to let it happen, and having flaws, meaning that they have to quite often recraft and recast these things, means it gives their players something to do as well. And player crafting does lead down the whole road of gathering supplies and crafting materials so they can make even better items. This could become a fourth pillar to your entire game. So I've briefly touched on Xanathar's guide and how those skill checks are made, but we need to actually decide the outcomes. So let's talk about setting some DCs. Setting the standard of a DC 10 for a pass, 15 for something fairly difficult, and 20 for something extremely difficult is perfectly viable here. Again, this doesn't need to be a pass-fail system. It can simply mean that if they roll above a certain number, they get a certain result and they use the required amount of resources. Remember that the players are investing their time in your world when they're doing these sorts of things, so you should reward them for immersing themselves even more into your game. Remember to reward these players, and something should always be gained from this system, even if it's something, like I said before, with a flaw that might possibly break. Remember that adding complications to things makes the game a little bit more realistic, I suppose, in a sense. It also adds that epic fantasy feeling of having these cool things that your character has done for itself. I can give you a bit of an example here. I was a DM for a party once where the rogue decided that he wanted to play some games and gamble a little bit. They found a table at the local tavern, sat down and started rolling some dice. However, they were rolling so badly they started bleeding money. That is, until the player decided, I want to cheat. Sure thing, I said. Roll sleight of hand. Let's see how this goes. He rolled, no one noticed, and he started to win big. But that's when things kind of started to go wrong. That rogue got cocky and started cheating on every hand just to ensure that they would win. They were having so much fun that they didn't realize that the NPCs had noticed them cheating. The NPCs didn't say anything, but when the game was over and the rogue stood up and walked outside, there was a group of thugs there waiting for them. It seems as though someone had tipped them off. Combat ensued, and this shows you that even small, simple skill checks during downtime could lead to side quests, adventures, and some precarious circumstances. These kinds of things that happen in downtime could even be enough to spur an entire campaign. You see, the rogue didn't know that the money he was stealing at that table was from a noble, and that noble controlled the local thugs, and now the rogue's being hunted all over the city. It literally started a whole nother side plot that I hadn't had planned for the entire party at all, but this was fun and the characters and players were having fun, so we just rolled with it. So this is a kind of expense that you don't really expect sometimes when it comes to skills in downtime, but there are a few other expenses that we should talk about. But before we do you guys mind hitting that like and subscribe button down below? It's absolutely phenomenal how far we've come in such a short amount of time. I can't believe we're almost at 300 subscribers. Let's keep going. Also, you can follow me along behind me there on patreon.com/criticalmits. I put out magic items, maps, and monsters every single month, along with a blog, kind of like this video, where I explain a bunch of stuff about Dungeons and Dragons. You can follow me everywhere at Critical Mits, and you can also find some of my stuff on the DM's Guild. The link's down below in the description. Okay, back to the video. Not all downtime activities are created equal. Some are far more expensive than others, and that's crafting items and magic items, and also shopping. If gold is a big part of your game and a big part of the reward system that you have for your players, you should start to think about the little things that add up. Taverns and inns aren't free, and those establishments have other services that they might be able to offer the players and their characters. This might allow your characters to feel like they're living a more lavish lifestyle and that the adventuring gig is pretty damn sweet. I'm talking about things like a room with its own bath, a giant feast, foot massages, something that can have your characters looking forward to coming back to the tavern after a long adventure. Imagine if the characters came back from a long adventure, they get back to the tavern, the whole tavern's sitting around, and they all walk in disheveled, but with bags of gold jingling by their sides. They yell out, "Rounds are on us for the whole night." They only have to pay, what, 10 gold to keep everybody drunk all night? They will gain so much popularity and renown throughout the town, and probably the local township, that everyone will be talking about them. They say these are the kinds of things money can't buy, but you just did. Giving your players more options like these small things that they can spend gold on will not only increase the feeling of reward when they find gold, but it'll also allow them to spend it on things rather than having to save up for that full plate armor. Maybe players even want to start building their own housing, maybe investing in small amounts in small local businesses here and there. Gold is a tool for their players to use, and it looks like in the 2024 Player's Handbook, or maybe it was the Dungeon Master's Guide, actually looking like we're getting some strongholds and followers. Yes, that's a nod to Colville's book. Just remember, we don't want this game to feel too much like real life, so don't start forcing them into debt. We want our players to have fun, use their gold freely, and not hoard it like dragons that they're trying to slay. Speaking of all these rewards to give your players on adventures, let's talk more about those.